This is an installation for the Michael Cacoyannis Foundation in Athens, Greece. What is this place, the Cacoyannis Foundation?
Michael Cacoyannis was a Greek filmmaker, Greek Cypriot filmmaker.
Right.
And he was very successful. And towards the end of his life, he founded a center for film and theater in Athens. The project, Vinyl Euripides, is based on his film cinematic adaptations of plays by Euripides.
A trilogy.
A trilogy, yes, having to do with the Trojan War.
What attracted you to these plays by Euripides? What is it that you find interesting in those three plays?
I came to those three plays for very specific, concrete reasons. I visited the Cacoyannis Foundation. They invited me to do something there. I looked around. I'm accustomed to doing things on outside windows, and I didn't see outside windows that would be appropriate. But I saw 3 floors of balustrades that were grouped around a central atrium. So I left Athens with that in mind and began researching Cacoyannis' films and discovered the trilogy. At the time I was planning this installation was the eruption of civil war in Syria and the exodus of so many refugees across the Aegean to Greece.
Well, the vinyl itself is a very unusual material. So how did the vinyl as a material, how did it shape the outcome of your work, what we actually see there?
Yeah. One of the big challenges is that I'm accustomed to working at very large scale with vinyl. And I had to set my scenes at a fairly modest scale. So that reduces the amount of information you can put into each scene. The vinyl is completely flat. It's going to be on glass. You can see through the glass to what's behind it, and sometimes you can see your own reflection in it. But because they're also panels and they represent a film sequence,
Right.
I needed to create connections between the different panels to give a sense both of a narrative continuity, but also to evoke the fact that this is based on a film. I like to suggest narrative through the way that I organize images, create sequences, use repetition, a kind of pattern and movement. Those are all narrative devices that suggest a story without there being a literal story. But here I had to tell specific stories. I had to create characters. How was I going to make a character? I took images from Greek vases and repeated a group of poses through every appearance of a particular character. But I was drawing from different styles of vases. So how could I convey that this was really just Agamemnon in all these situations? How could I convey that this was Electra, even though her body changes and her pose changes? And I didn't want to be faking Greek vase figures. And I wanted it to be authentically ancient Greek. The solution to that was to give them masks so they would become like performers in a play. When I was in the Archaeological Museum in Athens, I discovered some ceramic masks. I don't think they were actually theater masks, but they were ceramic masks. And it didn't matter to me what they were masks for. I photographed them, came home and made drawings of them. And then I applied them to different figures. I also made masks by taking heads off of other figures and putting them on there.
And then what you're saying makes me think that, the audience and the viewer, in order to experience the panels, they have to walk by them.
Yes.
So there is motion there, right? It's like
Exactly.
a choreography that you orchestrate for your audience.
Yes. The viewer is seeing my images in sequence. So I have to choreograph their movement. But also because the viewer is focusing on the vinyl, on the glass. As they move, whatever is seen through the glass shifts in relation to what's on the glass.
Right.
It changes at a different rate. A lot of the life of the piece comes from aspects that the viewer's not conscious of. That is, what they see behind the glass and sometimes what's reflected on the glass. Almost all the figures are lifted directly from archaeological artifacts from ancient Greece, mostly Greek vases. The Greek vases were useful not just for the source of images, but also the method of reducing them to 2 dimensions. So the Greeks mastered this, the ancient Greeks mastered this way of creating a complex figure in space using a very flat medium, which is slip-on pottery. And they mastered negative space to describe robes and features, but also to describe the space between figures.
Talking about the camera on that window and about the hands and about the barbed wire makes me want to talk more about some items or some objects and symbols that keep repeating themselves in many of your panels. And the ones that I mentioned are just few of them, some of them. Do you want to elaborate on that? Like the hands, the camera / weapon, the hands, the barbed wire.
And the nets.
The nets. The nets are very important.
The
right?
nets are really important. In Electra, it opens with the return of Agamemnon from the Trojan War. He's being welcomed by his children and his wife, Clytemnestra, and then Clytemnestra orchestrates his murder in revenge for the killing of their daughter. They kill Agamemnon by throwing a net over him in the bath. It's a very striking scene. So the net and his struggles inside the net are vivid in that play and in that film. I wanted to represent that scene because it was so important. So I created a set of nets that have their own history in my work and realized that Euripides is using that net in that one scene, but also as part, the net seems to permeate his understanding of what happens to people, the fate that we operate within. But even using fate externalizes it in a way that Euripides was adamant about opposing. It wasn't the gods that were doing this to us, it was ourselves.
Yeah.
I wanted to use the net as a way of showing the continuing reverberation of actions over time between different people that were caught up in this drama, and even the way that it spreads geographically from across the Aegean to Troy and back again. There's an automatic rifle.
Yeah.
I got to thinking about Agamemnon as a warlord. We call him a king, but he was out to plunder. And the barbed wire. I mean, barbed wire is definitely an anachronism, but it's symbolic of aggression or the desire to contain. We put barbed wire around detention camps, concentration camps. The story of the Trojan women is the story of what happened after all the men were killed and the women and children were enslaved. It's evident that the women and children were not being taken back to Greece to be simply like housekeepers and nannies. They were to suffer all the indignities that women have always suffered in war and the violence.
There is violence in these plays.
Yes.
And there is a lot of violence that comes from women.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, is violence different when it comes from women? Less expected, let's say, in some sense?
That was not highlighted so much in Cacoyannis, but it was present. And I chose to highlight it through the way that I represented soldiers and their way of handling the women in the story. So Cacoyannis produced a play in New York on the Trojan women, and I think his film was largely based on that. I show Clytemnestra in poses simultaneously of nurture and aggression. So her hands are folded in front of her, hands taken directly from a Madonna and child. So they're cradling something that's not there. But there's also a hand off to the side that's holding a knife. She has many aspects to who she is. She's deeply pained by the loss of her daughter, and she's determined to wreak revenge. I think in Euripides' plays, as well as in Cacoyannis' films, women are the protagonists, really, and they're the strongest characters. And they are agents. They have an agency.
So building characters, you talked about building characters and how you used masks for this, which is very appropriate because this is what was happening in ancient Athens, right? So I was wondering, do you leverage the power of color to do that? How are you using color?
I use color in multiple ways. One is to create connection and flow and movement across the panels. That's very important. And if you have too many colors, there's no continuity.
Yeah.
So I had to reduce the palette. I also used color as a way of highlighting particular moments or objects or particularly characters within individual panels. And there's one place, for example, where Clytemnestra is almost always in gold. She's a queen, so I've given her this gold color. Sometimes Agamemnon is gray and sometimes black. Seen against the white background within the building, black would really pop out. The gray is more recessive. So I used gray to create a kind of continuous flow, a kind of background information, supply a setting, supply minor characters, and then black becomes very aggressive. And then the red says, look here, but it says it with a certain kind of added passion and emphasis.
Your
hands are often red. Not always, but very often red. That's interesting. Yeah, and sometimes they're red because I'm using hands as flames, but also the fire is hands.
Based on all those conversations and layers of conversations, what would you consider
a success?
Success.
Yeah. I would consider this work a success. I took on telling specific stories. I didn't know I could do that. I didn't even know I wanted to do that. So that opens up new worlds for me. I consider it a success in that through taking on these stories, I was able to think about and even create images that were imbued by a contemporary context. Even though they're ancient stories, I don't want people to get stuck on their ancient Greekness. Out of what they're like 64, 70 separate images. And there's some of these that I keep returning to. And I've incorporated into subsequent works, like a project in Portugal that I did last fall, because they have really deep resonance for me.
So your next work is in dialogue with this work somehow. So the conversation keeps going in some sense.
If the conversation keeps going, it doesn't matter if it's perfect or not. What matters is that it keeps going.
And then you keep revisiting some of those panels.
Yes. My projects always influence how I behave in the classroom, so to speak. I might be teaching the same course, but the way I respond to what student work is doing has affected me. Our students have a passion for telling stories. I can connect more directly to what their passions are by having tried to take this on myself. The project, Vinyl Euripides at the Cacoyannis Foundation, will be there indefinitely. And they've spoken to me about how it transformed the space. I'm thrilled with that. These stories have a lasting presence within that place, which is very far away. They also have a lasting presence in my own work. I think this project has changed my practice in many different ways. It has connected me with my own literary past, my past as a student of literature as an undergraduate, and my own passion for history and my own personal connections to ancient Greek history. It's also given me tools for interpreting other histories and other cultures. That might be a way of connecting not only myself to these other cultures, but also drawing connections between Greece and ancient Greece and these other cultures. It's meant so much to me to connect to Athens. It's such an amazing city, not only in its ancient history, but contemporary Athens. I don't think I've ever been in a city quite like it.